Thank you so much, Ani. My name is Courtney Kowalchuk. I'm a psychotherapist in North County. I am really excited to present on positive discipline tonight for you guys. And there is a number of other topics that we're doing in this Virtual Parent Academy series. Ani's got a list of those, and those are happening every other week here on Zoom. And for those of you that have attended these before, you will know me. I have been doing these on and off for, I don't know, anywhere from 6 to 8 years. But at any rate, everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to be with us and to jump in and kind of learn a little bit about the positive discipline parenting model. I will say this is just one theory on parenting. It's one slice of the pie. I don't think that positive discipline is the end all be all, but there's a lot of really great skills and strategies to learn and utilize within this method. And so my hope is that I can share some of that with you both tonight and 2 weeks from now. I'll be doing a positive discipline part 2. All right. So here we go. Tonight, I want to start out our conversation about positive discipline with a quote. And this is a quote from Jane Nelson. I will kind of describe who she is in a little bit more detail later. However, I hope that we can get some discussion going, whether orally through your video or on your mic. You can also throw things in the chat if you don't feel comfortable speaking or turning on your mic. Or if you're doing multiple things and multitasking, that's totally okay. We're just glad you're here. So the quote is, "Where did we ever get the crazy idea that in order to get kids to do better, we first need to make them feel worse? Children do better when they feel better." And this is a quote that has really stuck out to me for a number of years, particularly since I started this journey with positive discipline many years ago at Rady Children's. I was working at one of the outpatient psychiatry clinics. And this is a quote that one of the licensed therapists there, who I was learning from, shared with me. And I think it really hits home when it comes to discipline, how we view discipline sometimes. And my hope is that some of you will share your thoughts, whether you can relate to this, whether you agree with it or disagree. My hope is we can kind of open the floor for any of you guys, the parents that are here, and I'll just go ahead and stay quiet for a little bit if anybody wants to share with what they think about this quote.
So with that being said, as how do you control the child when you're trying to give positive discipline, but they feel like they done something wrong and they have that I'm in trouble attitude, or I should have did this, or how would you approach that?
Yeah, thank you for that. So it's, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're referencing how do you deal with it as a parent if your child themselves takes that on and they feel worse when they're corrected, or you attempt a parenting moment or a teaching moment. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yes, because I want to come at it with with positive attitude and positive discipline. But so
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I just wanted to make sure I understood you correctly. I think my first inclination would be is there a history of that dynamic within the parenting, whether it's like if you're co-parenting or, um, where is that coming from? I guess I would start with, and then in terms of your response to that, to the child in that situation, I would start really, really kind and compassionate at first, right? And we're gonna get into how you do that and why we suggest that. But essentially, we're looking for connection first before correction. So you might say something like, "Hey bud, like I'm noticing you're looking like you got really sad, like you're doing something wrong. Can we talk about that? Like I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. Like you're not in trouble. I'm trying to just teach you, like this is my job as your parent and I love you, right? Like that's kind of going to take the edge off. And so this is kind of a multi-pronged answer, but I think that's kind of the progression, right? Is like start with where it's coming from. Um, if perhaps asking the child, like, hey, am I giving you the impression that when I correct you, like you're in trouble or you need to feel bad? Like, I'm sorry, that's not where we're going. Like, I'm your parent. I want to teach you. That's what I'm here for. And it seems like you're really sad. You know what I mean? Kind of go in that direction and see if that eventually with time of you doing that corrects that. I hope that's helpful.
I heard
I
this.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I heard this quote that really made me rethink and be more conscious of the way I talk to my child. It said, the way you speak to your child becomes their inner voice. So however you talk to them, that's the way they end up thinking about themselves as adults.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And it totally relates to this quote, right? Like um the way that we correct our kids and the way that we talk to them, they carry that with them forever. I totally agree with that. And I think it's really relevant and ties in really neatly with this quote. Because yeah, we're going to definitely dive through how our relationship impacts our kids, and that's like the glaring big idea is that our children don't do what we tell them to do, they do what we do. And if they see us talking to them in a demeaning, critical, harsh way, that's the inner voice that they develop. And so, yeah, great point. Thank you so much for sharing. I see that Jeff has his hand up, and then I also saw that maybe Darla wanted to talk after that. So maybe we could do that order.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to say regarding the quote is that I think the parents back when didn't have the resources that we do today. And it was all about, I mean, our parents only teach what they know or what they knew. They knew how to spank with a switch or with a belt or, um, what could be abuse today wasn't abuse 20 years ago. And so we got spankings. They didn't, we have a lot of resources today. We have parenting classes. We have, many different avenues that we can take as parents. And I always hear this, oh, we didn't have parenting books or we didn't, things of that nature. So that's just what our parents knew 20 years ago or whatever. But that's kind of my thought. And so it's finally taken time for us to really realize that that wasn't the correct way to teach kids and talk to kids and make kids or have kids do better in school or whatever it might be. That's my thoughts anyway.
Yes, Jeff, thank you so much for that input. I mean, I hear you saying, unfortunately, in the past, sometimes the parenting techniques made kids feel worse. And I think that you're 100% right. And I do think that it's really valuable to bring in that element of meeting those parents where they were, which was not a whole lot of resources and definitely not an access to information like we have today, right? With technology and
Right.
with
And I
the
always think
internet.
about, I don't want to be the parent that my mom and dad were,
Mm,
because that's, yeah, I get that that's all they knew, but I still don't want to be the parent that my dad was towards my kids. So, of course, as I said, the resources have helped us to be, I mean, a lack of a better term, better parents, but definitely our knowledge is a lot better than it was, as I said, 20 years ago. That makes
totally.
sense.
Yeah, 100%. And science has come a long way with studying,
Mhm.
actual empirical data of like what works with kids and what doesn't, what um, impacts our parenting strategies and uh, tools have on our kids. So, yeah, and I think that's a really nice place to come from. Like, of, hey, you didn't have the resources and you did what you could. And um, while there's a lot of great things they did as parents, there's a lot of room for improvement. And we're going to get into that. I always try to encourage parents in my parenting courses or that come to me for therapy help, like, what was your parent, how were you parented? And we'll get to that question where we can kind of have a dialogue if anybody is brave enough to share or wants to get vulnerable. But yeah, thank you so much, Jeff, for that.
Oh, you're
That
welcome.
was
Thank you so
really
much.
excellent
Thank you.
input. Darla had something, and then I'm going to go to Anel because he or she has the hand up. So did Darla want to say something next? I hope I'm right in that.
Oh, yes, thank you. Everything Jeff said, that's something I was thinking as well. In addition to that, I've gone back with my own parenting and looked at like kind of like their history and generation. And, my dad's like, well, that's how my dad did it. And that's how great grandmother did it. And I'm just looking at their families and like the culture in that day. And it was like they basically lived on these ranches or farms, and it was a different type of family. And so like the kids were almost like possessions. And so it's like, I tell you what to do, stop, you do what you got to do, because we all need this to live and survive. And so very different than today's families where we're like, we're growing together and let me help you become a great human being and contribute to society, and different mindset. And the second thing was when I've been negative to my own daughter, like hear myself repeating some of the things that was said to me, I stop and I'm like, oh no. And I think, why am I doing that? And it's because I feel like that I feel like that's the only way I could like change the direction, is to say like, what's wrong with you, or what, like those negative things. And it's like, then that kind of stops the child from the ignoring or whatever they're doing and not listening, and it almost gets their attention, like like changes the environment. But I don't like that, and so thank you for having this seminar. So
Yeah, thank you so much for your input. So there's a couple things, and what I heard you say initially was this difference in culture, right? Of like, just simply times were different back then. There was probably more of this culture of survival and like, you got to work hard. We can't put up with somebody who's not going to do, go feed the pigs and the cows, and like just totally different lifestyle than we have today. And so that's another excellent point, is our parents parented us differently and according to the times, right? According to the culture, according to our setting and our environment. And then I also heard you say you find yourself like repeating some of the things that they said. And I think that wow, it's so powerful because I think we all do it. And I think if you go back and you look at like, okay, what were some of the things that my parents did to me that were really activating or like that stuck with me in a really negative way? Like, let me make sure I don't do these things. And then sometimes we find ourselves doing them. And then it's like, like this is why they told me this thing, or this is why they, said this all the time to me. And so it gives us a little bit of perspective and a little bit of understanding. And I think that's really honest and self-aware. And as parents, we're gonna make mistakes. I'm gonna say it a lot in these classes. Parenting is hard. It's very challenging. And so be graceful with yourself, give yourself some grace. You make mistakes. My best advice and strategy there is to apologize when we make a mistake and we repair, because that's what good parents do. That's what we do in any good relationship. So yes, thank you so much for that. Anel, you have your hand raised, and then maybe that'll be the last comment for this, and we'll go ahead and move on. So I hope I'm saying your name right. Go ahead and chime in for us if you'd like. All right, I'm not getting any response there. So maybe I'm really not going to be able to say your name right, but Srividya, maybe you could chime in and give us.
Oh, yes, I did post a comment, but I think in the chat, I think you guys didn't see it. But I just want to know, how do you deal with this situation, which looks terrible to you, but your teenager just thinks it's a non-issue? Like, for example, repeat tardiness, and maybe how she's treating her younger sister. Many things for a teenager looks like it's not a big deal, it's not an issue at all. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I think that's a tough question as kids get older, because there are going to be things that I think behaviorally we prioritize, right? We prioritize maybe grades and attendance, and this is up to every family what you prioritize. But it sounds like there's a difference in values, right, between you and your daughter.
True.
And I think, did you say true?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, which is not uncommon, I will say. And I think that there's a number of ways to handle that. I think my first question would be, and I'm not gonna go too into depth with this just for the sake of time, but I'm gonna try to give you something. I would say start with your relationship with her, and I would come from a place of compassion, and I would say, you know, you've I've noticed that you've been tardy like a lot, right? You've got your number of how many days she's been tardy. Like, what's going on? Like, is there some way that I can help you be on time, or like kind of help you with your time management in the morning? Or like, do you need ideas, or do you want to problem solve? Like, how can I help? Because like this is a problem, and it's a problem for me. And like, do you think it's a problem? And with teenagers, this route can be a little bit better, because again, it's coming from a place of compassion and like relationship, right? And you might catch her off guard, and she might be like, what is going on? Like, why is she not scolding me? Or like, so I would kind of encourage that route first. If you haven't tried other things, kind of start there, and like maybe even just say like, hey, I'm worried that like XYZ will happen if you keep being late. Like, what's the penalty at school? And like kind of go that route. If you're finding that completely fails, I would say the alternative is like, hey, there's some privileges that you get with being a part of our family, and like these things are privileges. Like, what do you think is fair that I should do if you're tardy every day to school, right? Like, and kind of get her feedback, and then you might just have to set some consequences and like remove privileges or things like that. And or she gets the natural consequence, which is she has to go to Saturday school, or like whatever it is they do now at school. I don't really know. I think it varies from school to school, but you know, the natural order of things is that she's going to miss things, right? And she might start feeling like she's getting left out or left behind, or and if you can use natural consequences, that's always like my best strategy with positive discipline. So I hope that that little smorgasbord of ideas helps you.
Oh, yes.
Um,
You know what? The middle school did have consequences on that, Saturday school and all, or after school detention. But, the high school doesn't seem to. I did
mm,
discuss it with her. I asked her, is there a problem? Something delaying you because the classes in high school are far apart. And
mm,
so is it too far between your classes? I've asked her, I tried to figure out what could have gone wrong, but I, I do not get a clear answer. So I did
mm,
last week take away her cell phone after
mm,
school for the whole week while she was with me. But it is something which I find it like I don't think she's taking it seriously, and I I really am at my wits' end at this point. A point of time.
mm.
If this continues, what else can I work with?
Yeah. And sometimes with removing things, children, they're just wait, they just the time goes, they start the time and then they just wait until they get it back, right? Like no big deal. She'll give me my phone back at some point. Um, so that's why removal of items specifically is really difficult, because like I said, they just wait, they just start the timer until they can get it back. Now, it could be things like because to me that sounds like she's socializing maybe in between classes and it's making her late. And you know, you could say something like, um, you know, does she get picked up right away after school? Like, could you say like, okay, you're gonna have to wait, you know, the tardy minutes, you're gonna have to wait that long and then I'll pick you up, right? Like it depends on what she prioritizes in her life, right? And kind of some of those consequences built around more like activities or, like I said, privileges. She doesn't get social time with her friends, or because like that removal of the cell phone, like I said, is like some kids are like, whatever, I'll just wait till she gives it back. You know, I can hang until then. So again, more options, but we'll kind of get into some of that too with some more strategies on how to implement some of this stuff. But like I said, I always come from a place of compassion, like, you know, and sometimes you get a different response if it's like compassion and like trying to validate what's happening. Like, I know you probably do you want to spend time with your friends? Like, I totally get that. Maybe we could build in time on another day or like after school for you to like connect with your friends, or you know, like really trying to problem solve with her, coming from a place of genuine compassion might switch it up a little bit, but just another option.
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Like I said, just for the sake of time. And maybe what we'll do is if you throw stuff in the chat and I don't get time to address that, I can try to go back at the end if we've got some time for questions or personal parenting help, because I do love doing that. Thanks, guys, for your input on the quote. That was awesome. And it really, I think, helps the presentation when we get lots of parent feedback, because my hope is that you can use some of those skills or strategies, or at least not feel alone in this. Okay, so here are the objectives for tonight. We won't spend too much time on this because you've got these. If you've got the presentation, Ani put it in the chat. So I'm going to essentially introduce what positive discipline is. So essentially, you're going to get some new information about maybe more effective parenting, more effective discipline. my goal with positive discipline is always to create, improve upon the relationship. And you'll hear me kind of fall back on that a lot because I do believe that as a parent, the foundation to our parenting is relationship. It's the quality of relationship that we have with our children. And so from a very young age, I stress relationship. Are you respectful? Are you consistent? Are you, engaging your kids in the process, that it's not just a one-way relationship? Is it a two-way relationship? And do they feel heard, respected, loved, supported? And if the answer to that is like, "Ooh, I don't know, like maybe not," right? Like I'm gonna encourage you to work on that first, because I do believe that just as with a house, if our foundation is not solid, our house is going to crumble, right? So everything can't stand. I could give you all the tips and tricks in the book, and they won't work because your child doesn't trust you or doesn't feel loved or supported. And so I would say start there. So yeah, we'll have some time for you to kind of maybe explore some of your own beliefs about parenting. I'll ask another discussion question coming up next about this. And so I also want you to be able to connect with other families and parents and just kind of receive some support. One of my one of the points that I encourage parents that I work with the most on is, what is your style of parenting? If you don't know, start thinking about that. How do I parent? How do I typically parent? What do I normally do when I interact with my kids on a parenting level? Whether is it a lot of discipline or correction? Is it very authoritative? Like, you do what I say because I said so and I'm your parent? Is it really permissive? Like, kind of wishy-washy, maybe setting a limit and then not following through, or just kind of not setting limits at all because it's a little bit easier. If anybody wants to share, you can go ahead and either throw in the chat or speak out. What is your style of parenting? And that will kind of segue into how were you parented?
Can I talk?
Absolutely.
Hi, this is Mandana.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, thank you. We usually set a limit for our child. She's 9 years old. We speak clearly about her privileges and the consequences of her misbehavior. And we had an episode last week. So at this point, I don't know, did I do right on her or it was completely wrong? So since we had a clear conversation about the schoolwork and not hiding anything from your parents, because whatever happened at school, at the end of the day, we are your parent and we are here to support you no matter what. So we were so clear on this subject. And then she was hiding some paper, like math assessment. She failed twice back to back, and she was always giving us excuse, she forgot to bring it home. So anyway, we found out after 2 weeks, and I was pretty mad from the beginning. However, I had to take her privileges that night because she had a sleepover with one of her best friends. And I had to cancel it. It was like last minute cancellation. She was pretty upset with me. But in my own word, I would say, I already talked to her in many times and I gave her 2 chances because she did this mistake in the past. But since I was like wishy-washy, not setting a limit with her, I did let her to, have her played it. But this time I stopped doing that. I did stand on it and I totally canceled everything.
Yeah.
So she was pretty shocked. And she told me a day later, she said, I thought this time if I cry and beg you again, you're going to change your mind. And so now I know I learned my lesson. You're not changing your mind anymore. I don't know, that was a good type of discipline, or because some people call this punishment, but I did not punish her. It was, we were just setting a limit. and telling her, so if you do this, you're going to have a reward. But if if you misbehave, you're going to lose the privileges. And one of them is sleeping over with your, friend. There is no sleepover. No, I'm in a position like, did I do right or it was wrong? Or I'm very confused at this point. Although she said she shared her feeling with me. She said she learned her lesson because she knows, sending a text message to me and saying, I'm sorry, I promise you, doesn't work anymore. She has to show an action. But deep inside, I feel bad. I thought maybe to her it was a punishment. I really don't know.
Yeah, so I think I am understanding you clearly, and at the very least, I'm going to say it's very understandable for us as parents to like feel bad because we don't want to see our children unhappy or just struggle. And so
Right.
I can say I totally that's a valid feeling as a parent. And so my next thing would be what it sounds like. It does not sound like you did something wrong. I think quite the opposite. Now, I think that there could have been some things that maybe you do differently for the future. And I can tell you what those are. It sounds like you set a limit with her. She was very upset, which is going to happen, especially if you're not consistent with follow through before, because kids realize they learn the behavior and they go, oh, if I cry enough or if I make enough of a fuss, she's going to
Right.
give in. She's going to
Yeah.
give in, right?
And she told me about that. Yes.
Right. And that's normal. Your kid is not like a criminal mastermind. Like that's just normal, right? We do what works
You
as
lost an
as
umbrella
human
in
beings.
one of the residents, but they brought it.
Oh, somebody's got their
I don't know,
microphone
one
on.
of the residents, he went to work. I'm like, oh, how did he do it?
Tente, could you mute your mic, please? It's okay. So here's what I would say for the future. The being consistent part is going to reduce that wild reaction of like her kind of like, oh my gosh, mom's actually doing this, right? Like the more you're consistent, she expects it. She knows, right? This is what's coming if I lie or if I hide things. My mom's going to follow through. And so I would say that's totally fine. I would do the same thing likely. If I had something really big, a privilege that's not kind of within the normal parameters of my child life planned, and they, you know, didn't follow the rules and they showed me that like, hey, that, I'm not going to respect the rules that you've given me or the expectations. Yeah, you don't earn that. And you could say that this is something that's earned, right? That time with your
Right.
friends and my one suggestion for the future is tell your children what the limit is before you follow through with that. You know what I'm saying? So there's no surprise about what happens if I lie or if I don't do my work or if I whatever. It's like, hey, and this is part of positive discipline as a family setting these up in advance. Hey, what are the expectations? What happens if you don't do those things? What are the consequences? And like depending on the age of your child, I know you said, I think she said she's 9 if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Encouraging them to engage and this cooperative, like collaborative parenting exercise where you say like, what do you think is fair if you do XYZ? What should I do as a parent, right? And then you kind of work with that. Sometimes they'll be wildly inappropriate. Oh, nothing happened. And then it's like, come on, like I'm your parent. There has to be something like help me. And so that's kind of my only suggestion there is like they need to know what the consequence is or like what the expectation is. And outside of that, I think you did great. You're going to set your limits and then you're going to follow through with them and you're going to be consistent and your kids will be upset and you can validate that it's upsetting when something happens. I know you're really upset and I love you and I hope that this will help you make, those better choices in the future, like telling us about your schoolwork or whatever that might be. I think that's a good example. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Okay, let's see. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and, where did that go? I'm gonna read that one because this was in relation to Stephanie and Josh. I try to be flexible with my style, with boundaries. Okay, so Stephanie and Josh gave an example of how they would follow through with a boundary. And instead of taking items away, they're kind of using it as a teaching moment, which I really like. Darla says, pretty permissive for the last 10 years. Safety wise, they're authoritative. Chalice says, is there such a thing as too much consistency, it becoming ineffective? I think there's more to that question. I'd need more input on that. I think that consistency is super important when it comes to like following through with the things that you say you're going to do. If there's a consequence or if there's a boundary and it's broken, or I don't think you can ever be too consistent in terms of that. Now, whatever it is that you're asking, if it becomes ineffective, it might be that you're not changing your style with your child or with their age or with what it is that they're doing. So it could be that like you need to be consistent, but things do change, if that makes sense. So you kind of have to see what works, reassess, right? And kind of maybe a specific tool is becoming ineffective. Like, yeah, I think it's possible that parenting tools do become ineffective, but not necessarily through consistency, if that makes sense. I hope that helps, Chalice.
Can I explain a little on that?
Sure.
So it's okay. It's, I guess it's more when it comes to like changing the behavior. Like if the child is consistently, talking back and being disrespectful, and then there's consequences, and it's, not being able to go to birthday parties or things like that. Taking things away that you might think is important to them, but it becomes kind of like regular, and it becomes ineffective because then they just stop caring. It's like, well, I don't care, I don't need to go to his birthday party. Like, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, what that communicates, thanks for giving me more info. That to me communicates that that's not the right variable, right? Either it's not the right variable or taking things away from your kid just doesn't work. And that's true for some kids. So what I'm hearing you say is that you're finding that a strategy just doesn't work and you need something else. And so I think for a lot of parents, I always suggest if you're doing something and you're finding that it doesn't work, like now's the time to throw something else in, change it, do something different. And that looks like a lot of things, right? We could give you like a bunch of different suggestions depending on what it is and how old your child is. But I always say, like, if you're doing something and it's not working, don't do it anymore. If some suggestion that I give you, you try it and it doesn't work with your child, don't do it anymore. Like, and if you're doing something that I say don't do, which I don't know, I try to tell people, I try not to tell people do or don't do this, but like if it works for you, then keep doing it, right? Like I'm never going to tell anybody to change something that's working or vice versa. So Chalice, it sounds like maybe with your kiddo specifically, we've got to do something different. So yeah, I would say just kind of consistently using the same thing. It's not working. It's not changing the behavior, right? And so there's a couple of reasons why that could be. And with positive discipline, I'm going to encourage you and any other parent who experiences this to look up. When I do this in person, I have this big chart and it's called the mistaken behaviors, mistaken beliefs that prompt children to misbehave. And so that's kind of the foundation of positive discipline. And now I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I will encourage you guys to either buy a positive discipline book or look some of that stuff up on the internet, and you might be able to find it's called the mistaken belief chart. And like I said, when I'm in person, I have it. I pass it around the room and let people look at it. But it could be that the strategy that you're using is not addressing the belief behind the behavior. It's just trying to address the behavior, right? Like, if you don't stop doing that, I'm going to take this away, which is kind of a surface answer or a surface strategy, if that makes sense. So I always encourage parents to like, let's get, why are they doing this? Why do they keep doing this? What mistaken belief have they adopted that leads them to believe that this will work or help them or you know, get them somewhere. So I hope that helps a little bit. I know I'm not giving you like the specifics, but we'll get to some things to help. And I would certainly encourage, depending on the age of your child, Positive Discipline has all kinds of different like books that are specific to that age. And I'll get to that too. So I hope that helps a little bit. Thanks for the question. That's a really good one. Is it ever too late to begin positive discipline? No, I would say it's not too late to change your parenting style. I need more punishment ideas. That's funny. Okay, we have to move on, and I'll hopefully have time for questions at the end. I won't have time to introduce you guys if I keep taking questions at the moment, but I love it. Keep it coming. I'll try to address some more as we go and at the end. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a background, the history of positive discipline. Sometimes I think it can be really helpful, especially for parents who either are like, oh, that's not going to work for me, or oh, I don't know anything about that. That's bizarre, or that's weird, or it sounds like gentle parenting, and I don't like that. So I'll give you a little bit of background, and maybe that'll help if you've got any feelings about it. So positive discipline, the idea is the foundational structure was introduced in the 1920s by some psychologists and psychiatrists, Adler and Drakers. This was originated in Europe, and it was brought over and kind of changed around a little bit, and I'll get to that, to the United States in the 1930s. And what's interesting about that, I think, is a lot of people think like, oh, this is this new like gentle parenting that's all soft and permissive, and you just let your kid do whatever you want. And I think the exact opposite is true of positive discipline. The founders actually were kind of their whole goal of positive discipline was to advocate for children, because in the 1920s, there was a lot of really, really wild things happening in terms of parenting and behavior management and things like that of children. And so we already had a couple of parents, or at least one parent, say like we were spanked, right? There was a lot of physical parenting that would classify as physical abuse nowadays. And these specialists in mental health were like, wait a minute, like we need another option. And so they started researching what I was just talking about, which is, why do children misbehave and how can we treat them in a respectful way to help change that, right? So heavily influenced by advocating for treating children respectfully, which I've said that's the foundation, right? We want to have a respectful relationship with our kids, because if we don't, I don't think that they listen to us. They won't follow what we want them to do. So they also not only were advocating for a respectful relationship, but they didn't want this to turn into spoiling kids, pampering kids, because I think that's what it used to be called, right? Like, oh, you're spoiling them, like spare the rod, spoil the child, right? Like there's a lot of, I'm not saying there's not value in that, especially if you come from a spiritual or religious background. I don't discount that at all, because I do believe that children require discipline. However, there's some sort of middle ground and some sort of in between. And so this is where this stemmed from. these gentlemen, they wanted something different. They wanted to advocate for kids and treat children differently. I think they started to realize what the impact was of these types of parenting that were common in the 20s. And yeah, they realized this is not helping any of these social or behavioral problems with children, and they were living that. So brought over to the United States in the 30s. I think it kind of didn't really gain a whole bunch of traction until the 80s. And there were two psychologists that expounded upon the psychological foundation of positive discipline, Lynn Lott and Jane Nelson. That's who I got the quote from at the beginning. They began formulating, I guess I would say reformulating, some actual manuals like of positive discipline, how to parent, right? Like there's no manual. Well, they started formulating these things, and they started looking at a variety of populations. So it wasn't just like, let's parent your kids and everybody parent the same, right? Parent the same and you parent your kids the same regardless of age. We really, as positive discipline educators, we don't think that that's the way that you do it, right? You've got to kind of parent differently. Every child responds differently, specific populations, right? Teenagers respond differently than 0 to 5, etc. So when I'm in person doing these classes too, I also I have tons of positive discipline manuals and books, and I like to pass those around, and you kind of get a feel for, oh, it kind of looks like this. Maybe I want to order this one. I'm not affiliated with positive discipline in any way, other than I am a positive discipline certified and trained educator. And I really believe in the model as a psychotherapist. But you can find lots of books, used positive discipline books and things. But if you want to kind of get a head start on your parenting and are interested, you could always like search for those books, and they're really, really, really helpful. Okay, so to kind of further delve into that, there's been a lot of data that has supported the introduction of positive discipline. And so my hope in introducing some of this for you guys is like, oh, okay, like she didn't just like make this up. It's not this kind of gentle parenting that doesn't work. They've been doing a lot of research studies on the implementation of positive discipline and how it helps actually change behavior. So this person asked, what age do you recommend positive or negative discipline? I would say you got to start as early as you can. If today is the day, then I would say start now. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of this. You could certainly screenshot this or download the PDF from the chat. And if you are super interested and geek out on this stuff like I do, you can look up these studies. I gave you the citation so that you can find them. The bulk of what this says, and for the sake of time, the reality is that they started implementing positive discipline strategies into different schools, and there was very clear data. In one of the biggest schools that they did, it was a Sacramento elementary school, suspensions decreased from 64 to 4 in the year. Vandalism episodes decreased from 24 to 2. Teachers started, reporting that this was really improving the atmosphere, behavior, academic performance. And I will say too, there's a separate training for teachers and educators. If any of you guys are teachers and educators and you're interested in implementing positive discipline in your classroom, there's a whole training and thing that you can go through, an education program that you can go through to do that. And you might get some of these results, which is awesome. It just kind of changes the way that you talk and speak and discipline in your classroom. And I think it's awesome. And then of course there's like the parent program, which is what I am teaching you guys about today. So at any rate, some of the teachers were actually, trained in this, and they started seeing statistically significant improvement in the behavior of students when they were compared to control schools. Studies have repeatedly showed that there's been more of a perception of students feeling connected to their school community. And what we know about feeling connected, it's almost the direct opposite if we look at from a, you know, psychological standpoint to isolation, right? Isolation versus connectedness. And so if we want kids to feel more connected and thus less isolated, using these principles in schools, using these principles at home, it can really decrease the incidence of what we call like socially risky behavior, emotional distress, suicidal thoughts, suicidal attempts, self-harm, drug use, violent behavior. And we find that positive discipline implemented in classrooms repeatedly increases academic performance with kids. And also there's a point of introducing and teaching social skills to kids. Positive discipline is really big on teaching of skills, using discipline as a teaching moment and teaching experience. And so there's some data that came out on significant evidence showing that teaching young students social skills has protective effects that last into adolescence and adulthood. They're also more likely to succeed in school and less likely to have kind of some of these problem behaviors that we're talking about. So I do realize I work in schools. I have worked in schools in the San Diego area 2015, probably almost 10 years now. And I do recognize there's a huge disparity in terms of social skills training for kids. So my best recommendation, the only thing that I can come up with, because it's not, whether the resources aren't there for schools or we could kind of go down that rabbit hole, but like helping your kids as a parent teach social skills as a priority. Let's see. Okay. So a reminder about like what I'm going to give you today. Today's an introduction to positive discipline. I'll give you some more specific examples in maybe the tail end of today's class, and then next the 2 weeks from now class, part 2. Because today I'm just kind of trying to get you guys introduced to it. And this is like so much material and information that this could take. I teach positive discipline classes that are, you know, 10 to 18 classes long. So having 2 courses, you know, 2 hours a piece is really a tough job. So I'll give you as much as I can, and I would really encourage you, if you want to learn more about positive discipline, specifically about your age of child and specific techniques, to get a book. But I will give you some. So here's some answers to that question, or at least a version of an answer to that question, which is some criteria for effective discipline. So this is going to be kind of like a foundational, like start doing these things, and this is going to kind of change your trajectory, right? And then we're going to get more into like specific language, specific phrases, specific scenarios, and a book is going to help you immensely with this. Because again, I can't give you everything. I don't have enough time in this class. But so 5 criteria for effective discipline. This is where you should start. Let me talk about effective discipline first, because that is one of the points that I bring up or get questions about the most. And that is, to do that, I want to illustrate a point, and I want you to think about the word discipline, right? Which comes from the root word disciple. And to get your brain juices flowing, like, what do you think when you hear the word disciple? If,
Jesus.
oh yeah. Jesus and his disciples, right? And who were the disciples? For anybody that's like, I don't know, or I don't believe that, or I'm not in that world.
His followers?
Yeah, followers. Yeah. Anybody else kind of play on the word disciple? Can relate to that at all? Yeah, I mean, so essentially the word disciple and the word discipline, that root word, it does come from that realm, right? Which is the disciples were students of Jesus, right? Um, Without getting into the weeds about that, teacher-student relationship, right? And so what I want you guys to adopt, if you're interested in trying something new and you don't currently do this, you can kind of change the way that alter the way that you think about discipline in terms of, am I being a good teacher? How do I teach my child who's 3, 10, 16 how to do XYZ, right? I think a lot of times when I ask parents this, especially in person, sometimes I do an exercise where I say, like, okay, give me all the words that come to mind when you hear the word discipline. For a lot of people, punishment, correction, yelling, right? Like, think of all the things that like your parents did, like what kind of things come into mind when you think about that. Discipline, I think about like correction, keeping my kid on track, making sure they do these things, right? Like, and that can be a really powerful experience. Unfortunately, again, I don't have the time and we're not in person. And just think about that. Take that home. What do you think about when you think about the word discipline? And what I want you to do from a positive discipline perspective is try to think about this as a student-teacher relationship. You are teaching your child how to live in the world, right? How to tie their shoes, how to complete their homework and be honest, how to be a good steward of the resources that you give them, like how to drive, right? There's all these things. And if you can think about it a little bit more in terms of teaching rather than punishing or correcting, you can kind of have like a paradigm shift. A lot of people, and I know I did when I started learning this, I learned it took whoa, like I'm not going to spank my kids, I'm not going to make my kids fear me, I'm not going to put them in timeout, like what, like this is, I'm learning something totally new. And so yeah, it's a paradigm shift for a lot of people. So that's just kind of a tidbit exercise that you can do and kind of take home with you and your spouse or your co-parent or parent, whoever you parent your kids with. Students, consequences, safety. Yeah, big one. Teaching your kids about what's safe in the world. Totally. That's our job and kind of the foundational guideline that we have. Okay, so expounding upon that, there's 5 criteria for effective discipline. And this is coming from a positive discipline standpoint, obviously. Number 1, your discipline will help your child feel a sense of connection, right? And in parentheses, this is going to help them feel like they belong. It's going to help them feel significant. And these are the 2 foundational psychological principles that the founders were really concerned with. I'll kind of go explain this a little bit. Most human beings, and this was the psychological theory that Adler came up with, his view is that human beings, their most foundational desire is to feel like they belong. They feel like they belong in their system, in their world, right? Whether it's with their family, whether it's with their siblings, with their community, with their classroom. We as human beings, from this particular theoretical approach, that's the foundational desire of human beings, that we need to feel like we belong and we need to feel significant. And so in this model of parenting, we want to help, we have to address that. We want to help children feel connected, right? And that's that relationship. Do you feel like you belong in our family? Do you feel significant to me and to dad or to mom or to whoever, to siblings? Do you feel like you belong and do you feel significant, right? And so that connection, that relationship is foundational. That's why I put it as number 1. So if you're asking yourself these questions and you're willing to kind of brainstorm or at least process some of this stuff, I would really encourage that you do it with your partner, or if you don't have a partner, whoever you co-parent with. And if you don't co-parent with anybody, do it with yourself. Maybe do it with a trusted friend, a girlfriend or a guy friend that is a parent. You guys can kind of explore this together, and it sometimes can be a really powerful experience. Number 2, the second criteria for effective discipline is your discipline, is your parenting mutually respective, right? We've talked a little bit about this. Is it mutually respective, and is it encouraging to your child? Is your child encouraged to do well, to do better, right? And this goes back to the quote at the beginning. Kids are not encouraged by punitive discipline, by a lot of kind of traditional authoritative parenting. And that's why a lot of parents find that it doesn't work. And so this is the little kind of skill or thing that goes with that in terms of positive discipline. And that is, we as positive discipline parents, we are kind and we are firm at the same time. And a lot of parents, this is kind of a key piece for parents who feel a little resistant to the idea of positive discipline or gentle parenting, or like this kind of language we use, right? You're kind and you're firm. So we are never encouraging you to just be kind, because being kind doesn't help your children succeed, and it doesn't get results, and it is not effective long term. So we're not encouraging you to just be kind. We're encouraging you to be kind and firm, right? We're encouraging you to be direct, to establish the boundaries and the expectations for your children, and to follow through, right? And there's some language that we use in positive discipline, and we'll get to that, I think, in the second series. I have some specific phrases that we use that are kind and firm to help parents learn that language and really expound upon that skill. Number 3, is your parenting effective, or is your discipline effective long term? Right? A lot of parenting strategies in the past are very short term. They get results short term. And those types of parenting doesn't consider what your child's thinking, feeling, learning, and deciding about him or herself and the world, right? So this goes back to that, like, I was talking about mistaken beliefs. Sometimes children, by way of their world and their interactions, their experiences, they decide certain things about themselves or the world, and that affects their behavior, right? And so what we want to encourage children to do is we want to change that belief, and that changes what they do in the future. Okay, so that changes the behavior on a foundational level instead of just this like short-term surface level parenting. And I think that's where positive discipline really separates itself from other kinds of parenting strategies or disciplines or modalities, whatever you want to call it. It's effective long-term. Does your discipline or parenting teach important social and life skills? So this, again, kind of ties into disciple, teaching. Are you teaching your child the social and life skills that they need to be successful? Are you teaching them to be respectful? Are you teaching them to have concern for others? Are you teaching them how to problem solve, right? Cooperation, skills to contribute? Because our kids, we're not just like born innately with this stuff. And sometimes I have one of my daughters, she's 3, almost 4, and it's really interesting. And I find myself doing this a lot with her. We'll say something and I'll have to define the word, right? Because I'll say like, oh, do you want to borrow that from me? Because she'll ask for something that's mine and want to keep it. And I'll say, well, you could borrow it. Like that's mine and I really like it, but you could borrow it. And then she'll say, okay. And then I'm like, wait, do you know what it means to borrow, right? Do you know what borrowing means? And then I have to explain it, and I have to teach her what it means to borrow something, right? And so I know that's really sounds basic, and yet at the same time, I want you to try to generalize that. Some of our kids, they don't know how to do the thing that we're asking them to do or the thing that they're expected to do. And if it's a skills issue, if it's a resource issue, that we can help with. And that's pretty simple, right? Is like, hey, and that's why I always recommend asking, hey, like, are you clear on what this expectation is? Or are you clear on like how to do this? Because sometimes we just assume, like, especially nowadays, kids look older, they talk older, they move older, and they're not, right? I'll get into this with the prefrontal cortex. Teenagers, it's like, oh, you're an adult, and they're not. Their brain is just not developed. So teaching these social and life skills and really reteaching and reteaching, because it takes that with kids. So the other aspect to this point, number 4, is, are you modeling it? Because that's how kids learn. I said this before. Kids don't do what we tell them to do, they do what we do. So are you modeling respect, right? Are you speaking to them in a really respectful way? Are you modeling that you have concern for others and their feelings and their desires and their needs? Are you modeling really appropriate emotional regulation and problem solving, right? Are you modeling cooperation with the co-parent or the ex or the grandparent or the babysitter, right? Like, are you modeling these things? And so that is our form of teaching, particularly with young children, because of mirror neurons. And if you don't know what those are, you could look it up. Essentially what it is the brain is wired to copy, right? If you think about children and language, that's how they learn, is their brain is mirroring what they see. So the more you talk to a little baby, the more they talk, right? The more you show them how to eat properly, the quicker they learn. So this is this idea that our brains, our children's brains, are wired to model what we do, and there's no getting around it. I'm sorry, there is no getting around it. So if you model a certain behavior, your children will do that thing. There is hope. There is hope. We can technically rewire the brain and rewire neurons, which is awesome. You can start now and start modeling that stuff. Number 5, does your discipline or parenting invite your children to discover how capable they are? This is a big one, and this one kind of ties in with some conversation that we had in the 2 weeks ago class, where we talked a little bit about like helicopter parenting and how to provide. One of the quotes that I said was, do not prepare the path for your child, prepare your child for the path. Okay, so this type of parenting encourages constructive use of personal power and autonomy. We want your child, developmentally appropriate, of course, to learn how to be autonomous, right? I see this a lot with toddlers and people that come to me for help with parenting toddlers. They're like doing everything for their toddler, right? And again, there is no shame or judgment. It's just, there's a different way to do that. And the different way to do that is allow your child to be autonomous and learn how powerful they are and how capable they are. Okay, so you might have to start setting up small little scenarios of like, hey, what does my child want to do? Okay, how do we like get you to that step, right? How do we get you little baby step towards the goal? If you want to be a dancer or you want to learn how to play a specific game, right? Like encourage them to accomplish little goals and discover how capable they are and how much they can do alone, and then really lay on the positive reinforcement when they do things independently and they do things that help them realize how capable they are. Because that's another thing. Positive reinforcement is data driven to show that that is infinitely more helpful in terms of changing and altering behavior than, say, negative reinforcement or punishment, things like that. It's like you praise the thing that you want and you ignore, and we do a lot of active ignoring in positive discipline. Of course, if within reason, this has nothing to do with safety, but if you can ignore it, we are trying to ignore it and then praise the behavior that we want to see, because we find that scientifically that works. So that's just kind of a tidbit there. But those are your 5 criteria. So I would say start looking at those. Look at the way that you currently parent. Do you have some of these criteria? What are your strong suits? What are your weaknesses? Again, there's going to be more specifics on how to do this. I know I just threw a bunch of information at you. Again, this is an intro, so don't feel like you have to remember it all and do it all. But this is a good place to start, is looking at these things and these qualities of parenting. Like what do you have in your toolbox? Are you doing some of these things? Awesome. Do more of it. Yeah, remember that parenting is really hard. Give yourself some grace, and you can always start new every day. So I don't know why that didn't go. Okay, so here's some common issues that I see with parenting. We won't spend too much, you're very welcome. We won't spend too much time on this. I'm sure we can all come up with our own ideas about what issues we have with parenting. And maybe even depending on your personality, make a really long list. So here's some common issues. A lot of what I see is either end of the extreme, so like, or equilibrium, right? Either you're really permissive or you're really authoritative or authoritarian. That those, in my experience, do not work well. If you're permissive and you like being permissive and you want to be permissive and it works for your kid and for your family, I'm not telling you to stop doing it. I'm just saying if you're doing that and it's not working and you want something different, that's where some of this stuff can help. But that's a common problem. Parenting out of fear. This happens a lot. It's one of the biggest things that I see in parents that I work with on a therapeutic level. And that is parents get really anxious about what's going to happen if they don't do this, or they don't set this limit, or they don't set this boundary. And I think a lot of that is just that. It's fear, it's anxiety. Some of it is well-founded and supported by some evidence in terms of your child's behavior, and some of it's not. Some of it is we're just fearful, or we've had some prior experiences or some prior trauma or some generational trauma or things that have not been resolved. So that's a really important one to look at. And yet I would also say you might have to go through that with a therapist or with a counselor, or maybe with kind of processing this yourself with somebody that you trust. What are my anxieties about my kid, and how does that play into my parenting? How does that show up in my parenting? Yeah, this is a big one. Not prioritizing the connection and or the relationship. That was number 1 on our list. And I think, and I believe, again, I'm not the end all be all, but I believe prioritizing the connection. I think my camera turned off. Give me just a second. All right, guys. Sorry, I've got this like really great HD setup. I hope somebody can tell, but it turns off after a specific period of sitting there, which is its only downside. So anyway, sorry about that. Thank you for your patience. One of the other common issues was the not prioritizing the connection, right? Not having that foundational relationship. I'm not going to go too far into this. You might be able to tell if you've got kind of a relationship issue with your kids. And if you feel like you're giving up, you're feeling out of control, there's constant conflict. These are all super common issues, right? I have seen so many parents that are like, my teenager doesn't respect me. They don't care about what I say. They do whatever they want because there's nothing I can do, right? And in this day and age, with the abundance of resources, there's also come a difference in the way that society treats teenagers, specifically teenagers who are just kind of out of control, right? I used to, when I was working with families at Rady Children's, I'd have a lot of families that would call me and they would say, look, my teenager doesn't come home. I know they're using drugs. I know they're having sex. I know they're not doing anything that I'm asking them to do. Like, help me, make them do it, right? And I'd say, look, like, one of my jobs in that sense was working with the parent to learn to kind of accept that we can't tie kids down in a chair and make them do anything, right? Not only is that abusive, it's just not going to work, right? And so there's countless families, and if you are there, I can really just feel for you, because that is a really hard place to be in. But I know there's a lot of families out there that feel that way. And so sometimes families are like, hey, this feels like this is beyond help. I can't do anything different. You feel like giving up. My best suggestion in that realm is like, get help, right? Don't do this by yourself. If you can, get professional help. If you can't, get help of a trusted friend, somebody that you can connect with, somebody that can help, because that can feel pretty hopeless, especially with teenagers where it's like we can't really do much, right? Some other common issues are that cyclical generational trauma that's been unresolved, right? Over the generations, there's this kind of either, I think somebody's got a hot mic, maybe AR tax. I don't know what that stands for, but if you could go ahead and mute your mic. It's always fun when people like they've got their mics going, and it happens because we're all at home and managing those sorts of things. But I don't want anybody to feel embarrassed if their microphone is going off. So yeah, some trauma, unresolved trauma definitely affects our parenting. And my best suggestion there is like, you got to get help for it. You got to deal with it, right? And the kind of last one that I've got here, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but not using discipline to teach, right? That disciple idea, mentality, but to punish or to correct. And I'll admit that I'm really guilty of this, especially with my 3.5-year-old, is like, I find myself correcting her a lot. And I really just have to prioritize. I have to pick my battles. I have to prioritize. I have to let natural consequences take their toll, to play out, right? And I don't ever want a child to feel like they're constantly corrected. And at the same time, I don't want to feel like I'm not teaching her or them. And yet at the same time, kids are always watching. They're always watching, like I said. And the best way of like something that even precedes correction is modeling, right? So there's kind of some ways around that, but I just wanted to share that with you guys. Anybody else, if you want to throw in the chat some issues that you have personally with parenting, if you're willing to go there. If you're not, I totally understand. Some of you have already shared some of these with us, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and putting yourself out there, because I do think that it helps other parents. You are not alone. Anel, I hope I'm saying that right.
Yes, you are. Can you hear me now? I had
Yes, ma'am.
mic issues. I just wanted to pipe in within this part. It's I've been a parent for 20 years now. I have a 20-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 12-year-old, and they've, it's like I feel like it's been the hardest job, right? It's constant, filled with self-reflection and adjusting parenting styles and trying to figure out what motivates one kid versus the other. And it's sometimes it can be completely just you feel like, oh my God, am I the only parent that's having all these different, issues that are like different? Whenever I feel like I have it down and I'm like super mom, like something comes up and I'm like, what? I never thought about that, And especially with technology changing. And I'm so glad that you talked about giving ourselves grace, because I come from a generation where, children words were not to be heard, right? Like we were kind of like silent and obedient. Also culturally, discipline was, like corporal punishment a lot. Like our parents didn't know to really care about our self-esteem. I feel like obviously innately they did, but all the things that we learned. But I wanted to say, like, I really appreciate that you mentioned the grace that we have to give ourselves, because I feel like I'm super tough on myself, and I can see that on my children. I have high expectations. Part of it is like your grandparents didn't come to this country for you to, be like average. Like that's kind of something that I hear myself saying that a lot. But also I do want them to respect, like, a lot of their privileges. But I've found that I've been even that I have changed the way I parent, right? Like from my oldest child who's now in her third year at university versus my 12-year-old. And sometimes maybe I do feel like I've overcorrected because my oldest child, some of the feedback was like I was so scheduled and I felt under so much stress all the time. But she's also doing really great in her life, right? Like she's an organic chem major. So I'm like, maybe that was the right thing for her. I don't know. And then my little one, she's like the artist, and I'm like, when my oldest withdrawn herself, I was like, oh my God, never, don't ever get tattoos. And then with the youngest one, I'm like, oh look, I found this tattoo pens on Amazon. Like I'm trying, so I'm trying to be like, I don't want to stress her out, but also I want to um, kind of build that relationship with her, because I feel like I don't have it as much with her. And I don't know if it was like COVID or technology. Like I have a hard time connecting and with her sharing with me, like my other two. Like I feel like my oldest, like even overshares. She sent me a picture when she was at a frat house. I was like, no, go back to studying. But also, and with my little one, I don't know, I can't find that connection. Other than like maybe if I watch TikTok and I'm like, oh, did you see that? Like I'm trying, but I just feel like it's kind of like leadership. You're always have to be constantly learning and shifting. But I really appreciate everyone's comments, and I don't feel alone. So thank you for that.
Good. That is wonderful. Yeah, that was awesome feedback and just like your own kind of experience. And I mean, I heard a lot in there that was like, you are trying. And I want to say this, like, yeah, give yourself grace, but also each one of you has decided to show up to this class, to these classes, right? And that's effort. So showing your child that you're putting in the effort, slow changes and small things, right? These things can make a difference. If you are finding that you're struggling with the relationship, yeah, small things like spend some time out of your day to like, hey, what do you want to do? If you could do anything today with me or on Saturday or on my day off, like what would you want to do, right? And then do it and put your phone away, turn it off, right? There's a lot of distraction and things that come in. If you don't have a day and you have 15 minutes, that's a big one with positive discipline, is spending like 10 to 15 minutes a day or several times a week with each child alone, right? So like just prioritizing the relationship and really like trusting your children. I heard you say like you trust your older daughter, right? Like she's going to a frat party, but she's communicating with you, and we have to trust our kids to experience the world and to make the choices that we encouraged them to make, right? And allow them to do that. And so those are just, yeah, awesome you know words of empowerment for the other parents that are here and all of that. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go through the chat as soon as I'm done with, because we're getting close to time. It's 6:30. And I'll go through the chat if we've got time at the end. Okay, so this actually ties in really wonderful with Anel's comment, which is connection as a priority. And like I said, I will foot stomp the connection and the relationship over everything. And I know that's an extreme statement, but at the same time, that is what is shown time and time again through research and through data, that when kids feel connected, they feel like they belong, they feel like they're significant to you, the whole relationship can change, and certainly their behavior, right? And so I already addressed this, right? The research tells us that kids are hardwired from birth to connect with others. That's why they've got the mirror neurons. It's why they grow up and they need that socialization that everybody talks about, right? Socialize your baby, bring them around people, right? The bond, the mother baby bond, the caregiver bond, right, is huge, we're finding. And that wasn't known back then, and it is now, right? And so we know so much more about attachment. If you have babies that either they've got attachment issues, or they had kind of instability in caregivers when they were babies, or you've got adopted babies, I would recommend just looking into some books on attachment that can really kind of help you understand what's going on, and this kind of like hardwiring difference in your baby's brain or your child's brain. So at any rate, children who feel a sense of connection to the community, the family, the school, they're less likely to misbehave. And that's across the board. That's data driven. That's not just us saying this. So I think that's certainly why I, as a psychotherapist, really gravitated toward this model of parenting, because it does utilize that data point of when kids feel connected, when they feel like they belong, they act better, right? Better in terms of what we want. They're less likely to have some of those problem behaviors. So for me, as a clinician, I gravitated towards that, and I'm like, this is what will work, and this is what takes their psychology into mind. This isn't just like a parenting lady on Instagram who's like, well, this is what you need to do, right? It's like, this is data driven. And so that's what I cling to as a clinician, as a scientist, as a person, as a parent. And to be successful, which I think is what most parents want, right? And this might help you in this journey, is like, make a list of all the qualities you want your child to have. I often do this on the board too in my positive discipline seminars when I do like a 10 or 15-week class. Is there's an exercise where it's like, tell me all the qualities that you want your child to have, right? And parents are kind of going crazy, oh, well behaved, well spoken, they listen, they get good grades, right? They have great attendance, they're respectful. And most oftentimes I get this huge list, and at the end of it, we're usually missing being happy, right? Or being successful, or feeling like they belong, or feeling significant, right? And that is, I think, a huge gap sometimes in our parenting, right? So to be successful, to have those really great outcomes that we want, those like things that we're, the opposite of what we're anxious about. We want our kids to be super successful. We want them to be contributing members of society. But they have to learn the social skills, right? They have to learn this stuff. And schools, like I said, they don't always have the setting or the resource or the facility to do some of these things. And so I think as parents, yeah, it's our number one job to teach them, outside of safety, to teach them those really important social and life skills, because that's how they succeed as adults. So all in all, positive discipline is based on this. It's this understanding that discipline has to be taught, and that discipline does teach, right? We're using discipline as a teaching moment. Positive discipline doesn't use like punitive, right? Like punishment. It's not really heavy on that. And so I think that's why I really gravitate towards this. I hope that this is why you maybe will adopt some of this stuff. Oh, there's so many good questions in the comments that I wish I could answer them all. I'm going to go back and I'll just kind of go in order if I've got time at the end. Okay, so here's some specific ways that you can improve your parenting. And this is kind of the introduction to positive discipline tools and concepts. And so if you've got any of those questions that are in the chat box, you're struggling with a child who lies or who is tardy, or right, like try to look at this list and kind of generalize it to your situation, because this is where I would suggest some of you start. So some of the tools and concepts, the first one that I listed is mutual respect. Adults model firmness, and they modeled this respect by respecting themselves, right? You could do this in a variety of ways, whether it's like how you talk to yourself, how you talk about yourself, how you treat your appointments, how you treat your own time management, your own career, your own learning, right? Are you respectful of yourself? Do you speak of yourself well? Do you speak of your family members well? Do you right? Like we can kind of get this conversation going, or you can kind of observe it in yourself. Do I respect myself? Do I make sure that I'm on time for things? Do I make sure that I make time for myself to do my chores and my required tasks? And, am I responding to the needs of the situation, and whether my child needs something or whether somebody else needs something? Do I model kindness to my child? Do I model respecting their siblings' needs or the things that are going on? Again, I kind of fall back to like the best way to teach your kids is by modeling, like start there. And sometimes, I'm not saying that this is possible all the time, because we're human beings. We're not like perfect robots, right? That just do all this stuff automatically all the time, especially on a really stressed, taxed day. However, just like do your best, right? Keep trying. Try to model this in your everyday life, modeling respect to your neighbors, to the people that are cutting you off in the school line, or like whatever, right? Modeling that respect is going to go a really long way in terms of this connection, this compassion, this helping your child feel significant and that they belong. This we talked a little bit about earlier in response to some of the parents' concerns about their kids. And I would encourage you to try to identify the belief behind the behavior. Sometimes that can be really hard. I also know, like, I'm a therapist. This kind of is second nature to me, where I can kind of uncover that. But try to explore, like, okay, what is the most problematic behavior that my kid does, and what could they possibly, maybe like write it down, right? Brainstorm, like what possible things could they believe about themselves or about the world, right? So for example, I'm going to use this like tardy, the teenager that's tardy, right? What's her belief behind this? Does she believe maybe that time management isn't really an issue? Like maybe it doesn't matter if I'm on time or not. Maybe nobody notices. Maybe nobody cares, right? Like, and I'm just giving you examples. You have to really kind of think about this and try to identify that. And sometimes you can ask, right? Like, but brainstorming this is really helpful. I will share in our next session, if I can find it and manage to get all of it. It's a really large chart. I can try to share that so you guys can glance over that. It's basically that mistaken belief chart. But essentially, the discipline that's actually effective is going to recognize that kids do what they do for a reason, and our parenting has to work to change those beliefs or those reasons, right? Rather than just like, hey, quit doing that behavior. Discipline is going to incorporate all that other stuff, which is there's some belief behind the behavior. It's not just a randomized, infuriating thing that our child does. Some other ways to improve your parenting just off the bat is going to be like effective communication, right? So we'll start there. Like how do you communicate with your kids? Do you communicate, and this can go foundationally, right? Look at your body language, look at your tone, look at the volume and the pitch of your voice, right? Like communication styles. What kind of communication style do you have? We talked about this 2 weeks ago in our last chat. I am sorry if you missed it. But yeah, like you need effective communication in order to speak to your kid, right? To get across ideas and to have this element of respect and make your children feel connected, respected, like they belong, they're significant. You have to communicate that in a way, right? In a specific way. Do you find yourself yelling a lot? Do you find yourself shutting down a lot? Do you find yourself ignoring a lot? Like kind of look at the way you communicate. Are you aggressive in your communication? Are you passive in your communication? I would encourage you look up assertive communication and try to kind of, that's again, like we talked about 2 weeks ago, look that up or get a book on it or talk to somebody about it. Try to improve your communication because that's going to improve your parenting leaps and bounds. Again, discipline. So a little bit about problem solving skills. Are you a good problem solver? Do you struggle with problem solving, right? Like, do you have those skills? Can you teach your child those skills? Problem solving is like incredibly important for kids because I saw some comments like your kids they're not good with emotional regulation or like these things are, it's a lot of problem solving, right? Like, oh, this thing is going on that I don't like. How do I fix it, right? So like teaching your child how to solve a problem is foundational. They have to learn that. And if you're finding that your kids don't know how, you have to teach them, right? Like, and if you're like, I don't know how to teach them, again, like look it up, get a book, talk to somebody that you know who's a really good problem solver. Like whatever it takes, get some help. Because you have to teach them those skills in order for them to kind of have those other, I would say like hierarchical skills, if that makes sense. Teaching them problem solving skills. Do you have them? Do you have good communication skills? If you don't, that would be a task, right? Your homework for like the next week or the next 2 weeks is like start there. Discipline that teaches, we've already talked about this. You're not permissive, you're not punitive. You're not out to like punish and correct, right? You're not just letting your kids do whatever with no kind of limits, no consequences. We are all about teaching. It doesn't mean that there's not consequences, right? We talked about that already, but I don't want to keep harping on that. Focusing on solutions instead of punishment. That kind of was in the example that I gave you about a parent asked about her daughter who was tardy. And it was like, hey, problem solve, focus on solutions. How can I help you do this thing that you're not doing well, right? Like validate, oh my gosh, it must be really hard. Like, does it feel bad when you're tardy? Like, I'm sorry, like that probably sucks. It probably doesn't feel good. I know I don't feel good when I'm late to work, right? But okay, what are some problems? I get my clothes out for work. I make sure that I've got my lunch prepared the night before. Like I make sure, right? Like problem solving and focus on solutions instead of saying, I'm taking away everything, right? Like you're not going to get this anymore. It's like she might not know, and I know I'm using you as an example, but like she might not know like what solutions can I take to do this thing. And again, a lot of parents are like, well, yeah, they do, they know. That's just silly to say they don't. She's 16. But remember, kids prefrontal cortex, the secretary of their brain, like I like to call it, it's not developed until their mid-20s. So sometimes we're asking our children to do things that they physically, psychologically cannot do developmentally. So yeah, focus on solutions, help them out. What would you do? Share that with them. Hey, what do you think will work, right? Like having this solution-oriented conversation instead of punitive is going to go a long way. Encouragement. not just praise. Oh, good job, right? Like encouragement, like, man, what made you think to do that? That was awesome. Like, can you tell me about why you chose to do that? Or like, man, you must be really proud of yourself, right? Like that looks like encouragement instead of like, oh, good job, right? Cool. It's very different. And so like encouraging your kids, making them feel like, hey, you could do this. Like you might make a mistake, but you're really good at XYZ. I know I've seen you do it and you're great at it. Like, hey, you're on time every time you go out with the girls to the mall. Like I've seen you do it. You're so good at being on time. I know that you could do it. Right. And this is not like a sarcastic, you want to make sure you're not sarcastic. Teenagers especially respond to that from 10 miles away. You got to be genuine, like encourage them. You can do this. Like, I know you can, and I'm going to help you. Like, how can I help you? Right. You're going to notice the effort that they put in elsewhere, improvement elsewhere, not just when they succeed, right? When they try, when they put in effort. Oh, I've noticed like 2 times this week you were on time and you weren't tardy to those classes, right? Like, I know you can do it. Like, what happens on those days? What's different about those days? Right? And having those conversations that's going to build that long-term empowerment, a long-term encouragement, which is key for kids, key for kids to want to keep doing this, keep having this, disciple relationship with you. Okay, so those are some specific tools. We're at 6:45. I have given you all 10 slides. Here is some information that's my contact information and my kind of certification stuff. I realize that this is not Ani's information. She's going to throw it in the chat if she didn't already to make sure that you guys have her information to contact her. And I'm going to kind of go up and try to find some questions that I didn't get to. Alternative to timeout. Huh. Well, I could say one, he says, Charles asked, can you talk about alternatives to timeouts? I'm a really big fan of time ins. I know that this sounds a little wild for some of you that haven't gotten really into positive discipline. It is setting up a specific area in your child's environment, whether it's like in their bedroom or in another place in the house. That's a time in where we reword we rephrase, we reimagine how we look at that. This is not a punishment to go to timeout. Hey, like you're starting to get kind of snippy or short with me or spicy today. Like, what about taking a time in? Like maybe you could go put some stickers on your pad and you set up certain things in that space to help your child calm themselves, regroup, right? And a really, really great way to get them to use the time in area is you set up something like, hey, what do you like to do, right? Like some little things that can calm them down. Do you have a squishy ball or a nice stuffy, or for a teenager, some like really chill music, right? With some noise canceling headphones and a comfy chair in the dark, right? Like you use it yourself. Set up a time in. Hey, oh, mom's so overwhelmed today. I'm going to my time in area. Or dad's so overwhelmed. I got to go do 15 minutes in my time in area, right? And you model it. That's what I would talk about. That's an alternative to timeout. I'm going to hit the next one.
This takes a lot of time. All right, good. So we've talked.
Oh, Araceli, I think you've got a hot mic. Are you talking to us?
Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, older boy feels the younger siblings more spoiled. I treat him the same. Emphasize treat kids the same. Explain never had to discipline much. Works out our family. Okay, so Angie, I would say we treat our children differently and parent them differently because they're different, right? Your 10-year-old is so different than your 6-year-old, and maybe their genders are different. Maybe their personalities are different. I don't think there's any shame in actually admitting to that to our kids. I think quite the opposite. It can help them understand that we do parent our kids differently. We're not just like, I don't parent you guys different. It's exactly the same, right? Because I think we do. And just saying that and getting it out in the open and like, man, does that feel really bad that I do things a little bit differently for her than for you? Like, I want to hear it. I'm sorry. Like, let's talk about it, right? So like having a conversation and recognizing that like, this is my opinion, we don't raise our children the same. And secondarily, we're not the same parent that we were when we were parenting that child, right? We were different then. That was 4 years ago when I was doing that age of parenting for that specific child, right? I was kind of a different person then. And I think that's okay, right? And just kind of being transparent about that and apologetic or validating about how that must feel. Sometimes I think that's a better route to take. Let's see. Brittany says, my kids are fighting for my attention. Crabby, she's hungry. Oh, she's 3. Oh, yeah. Not budge, close the bathroom door. I often feel physically be away. I don't have to resort to talking, but I often feel a little lost. 3, that book is great. Highly sensitive parent for anybody else who feels like they're extra sensitive. Yeah, I hope that that helps. I think that the reality is toddlers are so hard because there's not a lot of rationality there, right? It's not like you can say like, hey, mom's got to take this parenting class. Can you go chill for like 2 hours? It's like they need you and it's the end of the world. And so I often find like connection, responding, hugging them, right? Oh, I hear you. You're so mad. Like you're so this right now. Like I hear you. And then just I'm here. I'm here. Hug them, whatever it takes. Being present in the same room can sometimes be really valuable. Excuse me. 5-year-old bully becomes so difficult. We have to lock him in his room, put him outside because he will not come around. Sometimes empathy and connection, but many times it doesn't. 3 and 5. Yeah, so sometimes you have some extremes or kids that maybe have like a little bit of an elevated response. Maybe they get aggressive or they get aggressive towards themselves or others. And there's some totally different techniques that you have to do when it comes to that. I think safety is always going to be the priority, right? So you need to do what you have to do in order to keep your kids safe. And sometimes if that's like holding their hands down, if they're littler kids so they don't hit you, positive discipline is very much like, I love you and I'm going to hold your hands because you're hitting mommy and I'm not going to let you hit me, right? And then you're doing it very gently. You're not, and you're very calm, right? Which I know is really hard. But one piece of advice for those younger kids, like 0 to 5, you are their nervous system at this age, and you have to lend your nervous system to your children and try to remember that. They don't have the ability to do that on their own. And so they need you to do it for them. That's why sometimes you'll notice when you pick your kids up when they're struggling, right? They will feel your heartbeat. It's like babies. They'll feel your heartbeat. They borrow your nervous system, right? And that's not just like mumbo jumbo, like, made up stuff. That's real. So Darla says, thank you. You're so welcome. You're so welcome. I'm so glad you're all here. Easily frustrated and can become aggressive. I would say depending on the age and depending on what level of aggression we're talking about, you might need some professional help for kids who get aggressive, right? If they're hitting, biting, things like that. There's some specific language that you can use and specific, like I said, kind of holding the kid's arms depending on how old they, like, I'm going to hold you until you stop. I'm going to protect your head from the floor if you're head banging. Like, you have to keep them safe. And sometimes you have to do that with yourself, right? As the parent, it can become incredibly traumatic and triggering for us. And yet my best advice is like, get help, process through that. It's going to be hard. Try to regulate your breathing and focus on that kind of as the foundation. Like, this is not personal. This will pass, right? Have some sort of mantra where you can be calm, can model that. Very sweet and smart, tends to lie a lot. I'd say like, what is he lying about and why? Like, what's that mistaken behavior? Is he lying because he doesn't want to get in trouble? Is he afraid? Like, yeah. Oh, someone suggested something. Boy Who Cried Wolf. Book recommendations for teens. Yeah, so Daniela, I think one of the best recommendations for teens is the specific positive discipline book for teenagers. She has so much, they have so much helpful language skills, like specific things that you can use to combat certain behaviors. So I would say start there. If you're so different and you have a hard time connecting with your child, I would say be an object in the room. If your kid likes to play video games and you're like, I'm so not into video games, I hate them, like be in the room. Just be an object, be furniture, just hang out. You don't have to say anything, you don't have to engage. Just be there. Like don't try to talk, oh, how'd your day go? Like, nope, just like be a piece of furniture and just chill. Start there. Ani's through her contact information. Thank you. This might be right about the teenage brain. Yep. Totally. And like what skills does she have to not be tardy, like during the day, right? Like when she's at school, does she have a watch? Is she looking at it? Does she know how to manage her time? Does she realize, hey, the time is passing in your head while you're talking to your girlfriend? Like, are you not managing your bathroom visits well? Like, how can you do that? How can you fix that on the front end, right? Yeah, totally. Oh, you guys are all so welcome. Everyone's saying thank you. Okay, I made it to the end. I hope that wasn't like rapid fire. It really was. So at any rate, I'm going to let you guys all go. If Ani doesn't have anything else, I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys about positive discipline. I'm sure you guys can tell I love it. I'm passionate about it. I'm so glad you guys are here and you guys are putting in the effort. You're all doing an awesome job. Just keep trying. Start your day new every day. You can do that. Be transparent with your kids. Take some of these skills. You're all so welcome. I will be back in 2 weeks with the second part. Oh, you guys are so welcome. Okay, Ani, if you don't have anything, I'm signing off. Everyone can go enjoy your evening with your kids or your family or yourself.